I've always thought of the past as a straight line, like first there were dinosaurs, then a long time of nothing, and then suddenly, us. But the more I learn, the more I realize it's not a line at all. It's a vast, sprawling map with countless dead ends, winding rivers, and forgotten paths. And if you zoom in on one of those paths, millions of years before our own story truly began, you'll find a creature that was a part of our family, a distant, forgotten cousin. That's where this story starts. A time before humans, in the era of Ouranopithecus. 6.5 million years ago, the land we now call Macedonia was not the rocky, sun-drenched landscape you see in history books. It was a place of vibrant, humid life. Imagine a world where the air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers and the constant hum of insects. The land was a mosaic of dense, towering forests and sun-dappled open woodlands. It was a world that was still in the grip of the late Miocene, a time of warmth and immense biodiversity, but a world that was also slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to change. In this world lived Kale. He was a young Ouranopithecus, a species of great ape whose fossils, though few, have given us a glimpse into a crucial moment in our history. Kyle was an impressive creature even as a juvenile. His frame was stockier and more robust than a modern chimpanzee's, with a powerful neck and broad shoulders. His face, reconstructed from fossil fragments, would have had a thick, protruding brow ridge and a formidable jaw, housing a set of thick enameled teeth perfectly suited for grinding down tough, fibrous plants and hard-shelled nuts. Kyle was part of a small family group, maybe a dozen individuals led by a huge, powerful male named Gideon. Gideon was a veteran of the valley, his body a map of old scars and a testament to a life of brutal survival. He was the protector, the provider, and the central pillar of their small community. The females and the young, like Kale, followed. His lead, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the constant search for food. A typical day for Kale was a study in survival. He would wake with the first light, high in the branches of a massive, ancient tree where the troop had spent the night, safe from predators. The air would be cool and wet, and the first order of business was always food. He'd climb with a sure-footed grace that was a mix of ape and something else, his body perfectly adapted to a life in both the trees and on the ground. His diet was tough. He would watch his mother use her powerful jaws to crack open a hard-shelled nut or dig for a tough tuber with her strong hands, and he would mimic her movements with a clumsy, youthful earnestness. But their world was not without its dangers. The forests were home to creatures that would make your skin crawl. There were enormous carnivores like the saber-toothed cat Machairodus, a terrifyingly efficient predator, and the massive bear dog Amphision, a powerful hunter that could run down almost anything. Kyle's troop survived through a combination of vigilance and numbers. They were a family, and their strength was in their bond. One evening, as the sun was setting in a riot of orange and purple, a strange event occurred. The ground, which had been dry and cracked for weeks, let out a deep, low rumble. It wasn't the sound of an animal or a tree falling. It was a sound that came from deep within the earth itself, a sound that made the very air vibrate. The birds fell silent, and even the insects stopped their humming. The troop, which had been preparing for the night, froze. Gideon let out a sharp warning call, a sound that was less a growl and more a guttural command for everyone to be still. The rumbling stopped as quickly as it started, but its message was clear. The earth was shifting, changing. The ground beneath, their feet, once so solid and dependable, was starting to feel less so. It was a subtle sign, a single line of a much larger story that was unfolding across the continent. The plates of the earth were moving, shaping new mountains and valleys, and these changes were causing the weather to shift. The wet, humid world they had always known was slowly, relentlessly giving way to a new, drier reality. This was a story, not just about Kale and his family. but about a species and a world on the brink of a monumental change. And this was just the beginning. The Earth's subtle grumbling was more than just a momentary disturbance. It was a prelude. Over the next few weeks, the changes became impossible to ignore. The rain, once a steady, life-giving presence, became scarce. The sun, once filtered by the thick canopy, now beat down with a relentless, scorching heat. The ground grew harder, the once lush vegetation began to wither, and the vibrant life of the forest started to recede, as if a great, invisible hand was pulling the world's colors away. For Kale's troop, this meant a new reality. The easy foraging grounds they had always relied on were no longer a reliable source of food. The sweet, juicy fruits they loved were a distant memory, replaced by tough, fibrous plants that required more effort to find and even more to eat. Their thick enameled teeth, a physical trait that had always been an advantage, were now an absolute necessity for survival. The new reality brought with it a new kind of tension. Food was no longer a shared luxury. It was a desperate, individual pursuit. The troops' movements became more erratic, their mood more volatile. Gideon, the leader, was still a powerful presence, but his authority was being tested in a way it never had been before. The quiet moments of leisure and play were gone, replaced by a constant, nervous energy. One morning, the troop woke to a terrible discovery. The small, flowing creek they had always relied on for water was now just a series of muddy, stagnant pools. The air was heavy with a low, mournful buzzing of flies, and the scent of death hung over the place. Animals, weaker and less fortunate than they were, had succumbed to the drought. It was a stark, terrifying sign that their paradise was gone. Gideon, sensing the growing despair in his troop, let out a loud, thunderous call, not of anger, but of command. He led them away from the desolate creek, not toward the forest, but toward the open plains. It was a risky move. The forests offered some protection from the predators, but the plains were wide, exposed, and dangerous. But Gideon knew that the plains also held a different kind of promise. In the deep, sun-baked earth, there were roots and tubers that were more resilient to the drought, a hidden food source that could mean the difference between life and death. The journey across the open land was a harrowing one. The sun was an enemy, and every rustle of the dry grass was a potential threat. Kyle stayed close to his mother, his heart a frantic drumbeat in his chest. He watched as Gideon, with a quiet, solid strength, led them on, his massive body a moving shield against the world. He was a leader forged in a different time, a time of plenty, but he was adapting. He was learning a new way to survive. And then they saw it. A dark, powerful shape, low to the ground. A saber-toothed cat, a magnificent and terrifying predator, named Macaridus. It was stalking a herd of deer-like creatures called Samotherium a good distance away, but its very presence was enough to put the entire troop on high alert. The cat's movements were silent and fluid, a chilling display of predatory power. Gideon didn't panic. He let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that was a command for silence and stillness. The troop froze, a collection of statues in the middle of a deadly plain. The cat, its attention fixed on its prey, did not see them. They waited, their collective breath held, for what felt like an eternity. When the cat finally disappeared into the tall grass, and the herd scattered in a storm of dust and motion, Gideon led them on. His face was a mask of quiet determination. He had faced down a threat not with aggression, but with caution and patience. He had chosen to outsmart the predator, not to fight it. The encounter was a powerful lesson for Kale. He realized that the world was no longer just about strength and climbing. It was about observation, about knowing when to act and when to be still. It was a new way of thinking, a new kind of intelligence. As they finally reached a patch of thorny acacia trees and began to dig for the last precious roots, Kale understood that their old life was gone. Their paradise had become a battlefield, and the rules of the game had changed, and this was just the beginning of their fight to survive. The long, relentless drought was a slow poison, seeping into the very soul of the troop. It wasn't just the lack of food and water, it was the psychological toll. The constant hunger gnawed at them, and the fear of predators in the exposed plains was a relentless, low-level thrum of anxiety. The bonds that had once defined their family were starting to stretch and fray under the immense pressure. Gideon, the seasoned leader, was a strong presence, but his authority was quietly being tested. He was a product of the old world, a world of abundance, where his strength was enough to protect the troop. But this new world required something more. It required ingenuity, and Gideon was a creature of instinct and experience, not of innovation. In the shadows of this quiet struggle, a new power was rising. His name was Vex, a younger, more powerful male with a coiled, simmering aggression. He was a stark contrast to Gideon's patient, deliberate leadership. Vex was a creature of the new world, a world where you took what you needed and fought for what you wanted. He didn't see the value in waiting or in quiet diplomacy. He saw only opportunity and weakness. He was a creature of action. The rivalry between Gideon and Vex was not open at first. It was a silent, simmering conflict that played out in subtle ways. Vex would often peel away from the group on foraging missions, taking a few of the younger females with him. He would return with his bounty, a small, quiet victory that chipped away at Gideon's authority. He would not confront Gideon directly, but his very presence, his silent defiance, was a constant challenge. One afternoon, the troop was resting in the scant shade of a thorny acacia tree. The day had been long and fruitless. They had found only a few withered roots, and the thirst was a constant ache. Vex had been gone all morning with a small group of followers. He returned not with food, but with news. He had found water. He claimed to have seen a deep, hidden spring, a place that Gideon, in his cautious, old-world way, had never dared to explore. Gideon, wary of Vex's claim but desperate, decided to investigate. The journey was long and perilous, leading them through a treacherous, rocky gorge. They were exposed, vulnerable. It was a place teeming with dangers, a place that a wise leader would normally avoid. But the promise of water was a powerful motivator, and Gideon, for the first time, was leading with hope instead of caution. When they finally arrived, they found not a spring, but a cruel, mocking mirage. There was a deep, rocky depression, but it was bone dry. Vex had lied. It was a deliberate, cunning act of sabotage designed to expose Gideon's weakness and to break the troops' trust in their old leader. The discovery was a devastating blow to the troops' morale. The hunger and thirst, combined with the bitter betrayal, shattered their remaining cohesion. The silent conflict between Gideon and Vex erupted into an open challenge. Vex, his face a mask of furious ambition, let out a deep, guttural growl and stepped forward. The fight was not a brutal display of strength, but a short, vicious brawl. Vex was faster, his movements more deliberate and aggressive. Gideon was older, his strength slowly fading. The fight was a clash of two different worlds, the patient, measured world of the past, and the violent, opportunistic world of the future. Vex, with a final, savage blow, won the fight. Gideon, panting and defeated, was no longer the leader. The coup was a powerful, terrifying moment for Kale. He watched as Vex, his chest puffed out in a display of new power, took his place at the head of the troop. Vex was a leader born of scarcity and conflict, and his rule would be a brutal, unpredictable one. The defeat of Gideon wasn't just the end of a reign, it was the end of an era. The slow, patient way of life was gone, replaced by a new, violent order. And Kale, a young ape in a world that was becoming more and more dangerous, knew that his own survival would now depend on adapting to this terrifying new reality. The coup was swift and brutal. Vex, now the undisputed leader, ruled not with the quiet respect that Gideon had commanded, but with a palpable sense of fear. The troop was no longer a cohesive family unit, but a collection of individuals held together by the strong, unpredictable will of a single dominant male. The atmosphere was constantly charged with a nervous energy, a fear of upsetting the new alpha. Vex's leadership was a reflection of the new world they inhabited. He was a creature of scarcity and aggression, and his tactics were unforgiving. He pushed the troop to cover greater distances, taking risks that Gideon would have never considered. He was often successful, but his methods were costly. A younger female, one of his first followers, was lost to a pack of wild dogs on an open plain, a casualty of his reckless ambition. Her death sent a shiver of dread through the troop, a chilling reminder that their new leader's decisions came at a price. Kyle, now a little older and more independent, watched all of this unfold with a quiet, observant intensity. He missed the calm, patient leadership of Gideon. He missed the days when the troop moved as a single, coordinated body, not as a panicked, scattered mob. He saw the toll that Vex's rule was taking on his mother and the other females, who were forced to fight for every scrap of food and every drop of water. One day they stumbled upon a true oasis in the middle of the desolate plains, a small, rocky gorge with a trickle of fresh, clean water and a few stubborn, fruit-bearing trees that had managed to survive the drought. The discovery was a moment of profound relief. The troop rushed to the water, their thirst a frantic, single-minded drive. But Vex, with his newfound authority, was not interested in sharing. He stood guard over the water, letting only a few of his closest followers drink. The other apes, including Kale and his mother, were forced to wait, their desperation a cruel, visible thing. It was an act of possessiveness, of tyranny, that went against every natural instinct of their species. It was in this moment of profound injustice that Kale saw the old world again. Gideon, who had been a quiet, defeated presence since his loss, was watching. His body was still scarred and weary, but in his eyes there was a flicker of the old fire. He saw the suffering of his old family, and something deep inside him stirred. Gideon walked toward the water, not with the aggressive posturing of a challenger, but with the quiet dignity of a patriarch. He didn't look at Vex, but at the other apes, at the young ones who were thirsty and afraid. Vex, seeing the old leader's approach, let out a deep, warning growl, but Gideon didn't back down. He continued to move forward, a silent, unyielding presence. It wasn't a challenge for dominance. It was a challenge for decency. He was not asking for the right to lead, but for the right to be a family again. Vex, confused by this new kind of defiance, hesitated. His aggression was built on the premise of a physical fight, but this wasn't a physical fight. It was a battle of will, a battle of a new, chaotic leadership against an old, deeply ingrained sense of community. The tension in the gorge was so thick you could almost taste it. The other apes, watching the two leaders, held their breath. This was not a power struggle for a kingdom, but a quiet war for the soul of their species. The world was changing, and their own internal world was changing with it. Kale, a young observer on the cusp of his own manhood, understood that this was the real story. It wasn't just about survival. It was about what kind of creatures they would become in the struggle to survive. Gideon's quiet defiance was an act of profound courage. He was not challenging Vex with his fists, but with a gaze that held the weight of their species' history. It was a silent battle, a test of wills, and for a moment, it seemed that Gideon's dignity might be enough to break through Vex's tyrannical grip. But Vex, a creature of pure aggression, did not understand the language of respect or community. He understood only power. With a furious roar, Vex lunged at Gideon not with the intent of a duel, but with the ruthless fury of a predator. The fight was short and brutal. Vex was younger, faster, and unburdened by empathy. He didn't just win, he dominated. He left Gideon defeated and bleeding, a final public humiliation designed to erase any memory of his old leadership. The message was clear. There was only one law in this new world, and that was the law of Vex. His rule was absolute, and he would tolerate no dissent. The other apes, their last hope for a return to the old ways, shattered, scattered in fear. The family was broken. The old, patient world of Gideon was gone, replaced by a harsh, selfish new one. Kyle's mother, her face a mask of quiet determination, knew what this meant. There was no longer any safety in numbers, not with a leader like Vex. She took Kale by the hand and, with a silent understanding, began to move away from the main group. They were not running in panic, but walking with a sense of purpose. They were striking out on their own, a small, solitary pair, in a world that was becoming more dangerous with every passing day. Their journey was a study in profound loneliness. They moved through the parched, unforgiving landscape, their hunger, a constant, low-grade ache. They survived on what little they could find, digging for roots and scraping bark from the last of the dying trees. Kale, a young ape on the cusp of adulthood, was forced to grow up faster than he should have. He learned to read the subtle signs of the wind, the scent of a distant predator, the rustle of a snake in the tall, dry grass. He learned to be a survivor. Their path led them to a new, unfamiliar part of the valley. It was a place of high, rocky cliffs and deep ravines, a place that was both beautiful and terrifying. Kale's mother, her eyes sharp and observant, was looking for something more than just food. She was looking for safety, a place where Vex's long shadow could not reach them. And then they saw it. A deep, jagged scar in the face of a cliff, a cave that was hidden from the sun. The entrance was small and unassuming, but the air around it felt cool and moist. They moved toward it cautiously, their hearts thrumming with a mixture of fear and hope. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of damp stone. A small, clear spring trickled from a fissure in the rock, a miracle in a world that had forgotten the taste of fresh water. They drank their fill, their bodies rejoicing in the blessed relief. They had found their sanctuary, but the cave held another secret, a different kind of life. The back of the cave opened into a small, sun-dappled courtyard, and here they saw a sight that was both strange and fascinating. A small family of hominins, a different kind of ape entirely, was living there. They were smaller, less physically imposing, but their hands were doing something Kale had never seen before. They were using stones to crack open nuts, their movements deliberate and precise. They were using tools. Kale and his mother froze, their hearts pounding. The hominins saw them too. There was a long, silent moment of apprehension, a moment of profound evolutionary stillness. The two species, separated by millions of years of history, had finally met. The old world of the great apes had just collided with the new world of the tool-wielders. The rules of survival, which had been slowly changing, were now about to change forever. The tension in the cave was thick, a silent standoff between two species that had been evolving on separate paths for millions of years. Kyle and his mother, their hearts pounding in their chests, stood frozen at the entrance. Inside, the small family of hominins, a mother and her child, watched them with a quiet, unblinking intensity. There was no aggression in their eyes, no fear, just a profound, ancient curiosity. The hominin mother, whom I've named Lyra, after the Greek word for a lyre because her people's quiet existence felt like a delicate, musical thing, made the first move. She saw the hunger in Kale's eyes, the weary desperation of his mother. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached into a small basket woven from tough grasses and pulled out a handful of plump red berries. She held them out, a silent, fragile offering of peace and shared need. Kale's mother hesitated. Her entire life had been a lesson in caution and wariness. The world was a place of predators and rivals, and every interaction was a potential danger. But this was different. This was not a challenge. It was a gift. She looked from Lyra's outstretched hand to her face, searching for a sign of betrayal. She found none. She saw only a fellow survivor, a mother trying to feed her child in a world that was becoming more and more difficult. Slowly, cautiously, she took the berries. That single act, that simple exchange of food, was the beginning of a profound and unlikely partnership. The cave became their shared sanctuary, a small island of peace in a sea of chaos. The two mothers, communicating not with language but with gestures and a shared understanding of survival, began to work together. Kale's mother taught Lyra how to find the most nutritious grubs hiding beneath the bark of ancient trees and showed her which berries, though beautiful, were poisonous. Lyra, in turn, taught Kale's mother how to use the smooth, heavy stones from the riverbed to crack open nuts, a technique that was far more efficient than using her own teeth. The young ones, Kale and Lyra's son, played together in the dappled sunlight of the cave's courtyard. Their friendship was a bridge between two worlds. They were an odd pair, Kale with his robust, ape-like frame, and Lyra's son with his smaller, more delicate body. But they shared a common joy in the simple act of play. They chased each other, wrestled, and for the first time in his life, Kale saw a different kind of intelligence at work. He watched as Lyra's son would use a sharp stone to whittle a stick, and he would try to copy the movements, his small, nimble hands struggling to grasp the new, strange concept of a tool. This was the quiet, unseen turning point in our history. The world was changing, and the old way of survival, the way of brute strength and individual dominance, was no longer enough. The new world required something else: cooperation, ingenuity, and a willingness to learn. The two mothers and their children were not just surviving, they were evolving. They were forging a new path, a path that would diverge sharply from the fate of Vex and the rest of the splintered Ouranopithecus troop, who were still out in the plains, fighting a losing battle with the old, brutal rules of the past. The shared sanctuary of the cave was a testament to the future. It was a place where two separate species, driven by the same basic need to survive, found a way to bridge the gap of millions of years of evolution and work together. Kyle and his mother had not just found a safe place to live, they had found a new way to live. And that, in the end, was a far more valuable discovery than any oasis or hidden spring. It was the first hesitant step on a journey that would eventually lead to us. The small, hidden cave became a crucible of change. For months, Kale and his mother lived alongside Lyra and her child. Their lives intertwined in a way no one could have predicted. The lessons they taught each other went beyond mere survival. They were a fundamental shift in how they saw the world. Kale's mother, whose life had been dictated by the rhythms of the forest, learned from Lyra how to read the patterns of the open plains, how to find the most fertile patches of ground for digging roots, and how to track the herds of migrating animals. She learned the value of a planned hunt, not just a desperate chase. Lyra, in turn, benefited from the raw power and instinct of the Ouranopithecus. Kale's mother could scale trees with an agility Lyra could only dream of, reaching high-hanging fruit and watching for danger from a vantage point Lyra's people couldn't access. Their combined knowledge created a powerful new survival strategy, one that was far more effective than either of their species could have achieved alone. The young ones, Kale and Lyra's son, grew up with this unique blend of knowledge. Kale's powerful muscular body was perfectly adapted for climbing, but he was also learning to use a crude stone tool, his mind open to a new way of problem-solving. Lyra's son, smaller and less physically imposing, was learning the powerful art of observation, the subtle language of the forest, and the raw instincts of a great ape. They were a bridge between two worlds, a living testament to a new, shared future. But their peace was not to last. One scorching afternoon, a figure appeared on the horizon. It was a lone male, his body scarred, and his movements a mixture of exhaustion and rage. It was Vex, their old leader. He had been driven out of the plains by rival herds and other predators, a bitter testament to the failure of his aggressive, solitary style of survival. He was a creature of the past, defeated and desperate. He had tracked them to this hidden gorge, his rage a powerful, dangerous force. Vex saw the cave, the water, and the bounty of food with a possessive, furious gaze. But then he saw them. He saw Kale's mother and Lyra, the ape and the hominin, working side by side. He saw the children playing, a sight that was so unnatural and so alien to his way of thinking that it seemed to drive him mad. He let out a furious, thunderous roar, a sound that echoed through the ravine and shattered their fragile peace. He charged the cave, a final, desperate act of dominance. Kyle's mother, with her great strength, and Lyra, with her powerful new intelligence, stood together. They did not run. They had a home to protect, a new way of life to defend. The showdown was not a fight between two individuals, but a clash of two different eras, two different philosophies of survival. Vex, a relic of the old world, was about to face the combined power of the new. The story of the great apes was coming to an end, and the final chapter was about to be written in the dust of this forgotten valley. The showdown was not a simple brawl. It was a battle of two different worlds. Vex, a lone wolf of the old guard, charged the cave with a furious, unthinking aggression. He was a relic of a past where sheer physical power was the ultimate currency, and he was ready to claim what he saw as his by right. But he was no longer facing a single frightened family. He was facing a powerful new alliance. Kale's mother met his charge with a thunderous roar of her own, a sound that was a mix of maternal fury and a primal defense of her home. Her strength was immense, but she was not alone. Lyra, with a calm, focused intensity, stood behind her. As Vex closed in, Lyra let out a sharp, high-pitched call, a new kind of signal. At her sound, the young hominin and Kale began to throw small stones and tough, thorny branches at Vex, a flurry of distractions that broke his furious focus. Vex was thrown off balance. He was used to one-on-one combat, a direct, brutal exchange of blows. This was a new kind of warfare, a collective, coordinated defense that he had no answer for. He swiped at the children, but they were too fast, too agile. As he was distracted, Kale's mother landed a series of powerful blows, and Lyra, seeing her opportunity, used a long, sharp stick to jab at his flank, a painful, stinging attack that was not meant to kill, but to drive him off. The fight was a short, decisive lesson in the new rules of survival. Vex, wounded and utterly bewildered, was defeated not by a superior fighter, but by a superior strategy. He let out a final, pathetic snarl of rage and frustration, and then, a broken creature of a broken world, he limped away, disappearing forever, into the vast, empty plains. He was the last ghost of an era that had just ended. The cave was silent. The air, which had been charged with violence, was now thick with the scent of relief and victory. The two mothers, the ape and the hominin, looked at each other. There were no words, but there was a deep, shared understanding. They had not just survived, they had triumphed. They had created something new, something stronger than either of them could have been alone. This, then, is the end of our story, about Kale and his family. The tale of the Ouranopithecus is not a story of a species that failed. It is a story of a species that stood at a crossroads, and a small part of it, through a profound, chance encounter, took a small, hesitant step down a different path. The old world of the Miocene, The era of the great apes was over. The new world, the world of intelligence, cooperation, and tools had begun. The descendants of Kale's mother would go on to be the apes we know today, living in their own world, their own story, a testament to the powerful, independent strength of their lineage. But the descendants of Lyra and her child would go on to become something else entirely. They would master fire, they would build shelters, they would create art, they would tell stories, and they would eventually, millions of years later, look back at the fossilized remains of an ape with a robust skull and thick, worn teeth, and they would wonder about the time before humans, the era of the Ouranopithecus, and the incredible journey that had brought them here. And that, in the end, is the true beginning of our story.